I am the Director of Academic Integrity and the Testing Center at UC San Diego. It's an odd combination. Most of you don't have, most of the institutions here probably don't have an academic integrity office and probably don't, and maybe don't have a testing center. And the fact that we have both and that I am in charge of both is unique. I tell you that because it does inform my perspective. So I've got about 22 years in academic integrity, but only about coming up on 3 years in the testing center world. But they are obviously both strongly important to the universities and colleges because of the reason why we exist, which I'll get to in a second. I'm not just a practitioner, I'm also an author. That was our latest book. That was an edited volume. That is a great foundational book for you if you don't know much about academic integrity other than your personal experiences, but you don't know much about the research and the history and the literature on that. You could check out that book. And I'm very excited about our upcoming book coming out in March under the Teaching, Engaging, and Thriving series with University of Oklahoma Press under Jim Lang and Michelle Miller's editorial leadership. So super excited about that. What we're going to cover today is understanding the challenges posed by GenAI to integrity in teaching, learning, and assessment, identify the opportunities it presents to evolve teaching, learning, and assessment, and then clarify some very practical immediate and future strategies that instructors can employ to minimize these challenges and maximize the opportunities. Okay, so I know you all know about the challenges of GenAI, right? You've been living them for the last 2 years, but I want to broaden the framework and help us all remember the larger picture, the reason, our raison d'etre, basically, why we're all here. And that turns us to what I call the higher education institution and societal social contract. So we promise society to develop and certify knowledge and abilities. And I know often when we're in higher education, we're focused on the education side, the development side, and we sometimes kind of forget or we put in the back burner that our job is to certify, that society counts on us to say, hey, this person is capable at a certain level, an associate, bachelor's, master's, PhD, whatever level in this discipline, to positively, hopefully, contribute to society. And it's not just about that discipline too, but there's a whole bunch of other things that are assumed about higher education graduates. In particular, they have interpersonal skills and communication skills and collaboration skills. Hopefully they're ethical, so on and so forth. So basically, society depends on us, depends on our certifications as proxies for certain things, of certain knowledge and abilities that they then assume these people have. So lots can go wrong in that social contract, right? And what I call our moral obligations supply chain. And there's lots of things that could go wrong, but I'm going to focus on very particular things given the focus of our conversation today. First, instructors have to design fair and honest pedagogy and assessments, right? They have to know what the learning objectives are, and they have to design the right pedagogy that will help students master those learning objectives, and then they have to develop the right assessments to evaluate whether students met those learning objectives. So then they give the assessments, and of course, students have to fairly and honestly demonstrate their learning on those assessments so that faculty are actually assessing what or evaluating what they think they are, right? And then instructors have to fairly and honestly assess that student learning. And only then, when you add all of those up in all of the courses that all of the students take, can the institution honestly and fairly certify a student's knowledge and ability. So we count on so many people and so many individual pieces to get to that final certification and know that it's got some integrity to that degree. So if anything goes wrong in this supply chain, right, the certification loses value, the higher education institutions lose the trust of society, and social contract breaks down. One could argue that that's perhaps one of the reasons why we're seeing a diminishing trust in higher education. Maybe society and employers are saying, I don't see you guys living up to your social contract. I'm seeing graduates who don't have the skills and knowledge and abilities that I thought they were going to have. And it could be also why students flock to other organizations, platforms, and tools to help them see what their goal, learning, hopefully, but also achievement of a certification. They're not seeing that they're getting that from us. And of course, now with GenAI, students can easily, quickly, and cheaply offload their thinking to machines. So instead of doing the challenging work of learning, engaging in that friction of learning, they can just simply produce a false artifact of learning. And this is one of the most recent ones. It's not so recent, but it's one of the ones my faculty are most recently upset about, is this extension for Canvas quizzes that can easily have AI solve the questions for the students. Right? So that's a problem, obviously. Now, to be fair, students have always cognitively offloaded. This is not a new thing, right? They've been using spelling and grammar checks for a long time. We used to say that, we used to grade for spelling and grammar, and hopefully most now don't, because the machines do that for us. So why would we assess that skill anymore? We also, of course, have had students that get notes from classmates instead of going to class themselves. Maybe they've used a calculator instead of doing the math they were supposed to do in their head. Maybe instead of reading the books, they used Cliff's or Spark's notes, and now they'll use ChatGPT to summarize the readings. Using Google Translate, instead of writing that French language assignment themselves, they wrote it in English and had Google Translate put it in French for them. And of course, getting other humans to do their work for them, which is known as contract cheating. Estimated to be $1 billion+ industry that has existed for 15 years and has largely been ignored, at least by higher education institutions and the government in the United States. It is illegal in other countries like Australia, Ireland, Britain, and New Zealand, but the United States has basically turned a blind eye to this industry. And so AI just is the next thing in the long lines of tools and opportunities that students have used to offload some of the heavy lifting of learning. Now, that doesn't always have to mean cheating, right? Cognitive offloading doesn't always have to mean cheating. We all cognitively offload. We use our smartphones so we don't have to memorize phone numbers anymore. That's cognitive offloading. We write a grocery list before going shopping so we don't have to remember all the things we need to buy. We all cognitively offload. So when is it bad? Like, when does it go from, hey, that's a smart move and that frees you up to do more important things, to cheating? Well, it becomes cheating when it undermines the learning objectives. So let's go back to Google Translate. If I'm studying in a French university, and French is not my first language, and so it's really much more difficult for me, and I'm taking a chemistry class, maybe it's not so bad if I use Google Translate to help me understand the language, or the coursework, to help me understand some of the chemistry expressions, or even maybe when I'm writing my lab report to help me express my knowledge in French. But if I'm in an English language institution and I'm taking a French language class, and I write my assignment in English and then just have Google Translate or ChatGPT put it into French and hand it in, obviously that would be cheating, right? Because it undermines the learning objectives, which is to learn how to communicate in French. So that's a kind of an obvious one. And this is why we can't just have a blanket rule for it's cheating to use AI when X, because it really is anchored towards what are the learning objectives for that course, for that program, or that a bundle of competencies. Of course, if it gives a dishonest impression of knowledge and abilities, it's cheating, right? So if I pretend that I conducted a research study, as one of our students did, but really they just had ChatGPT write up a report as if the research study was done, that's dishonest. And of course, if it violates the rules for that class or assignment. Now, hopefully the rules are connected to the learning objectives and they're not just rules for rules' sake. But even if they were, that would essentially be cheating, because you are not playing by the rules, which creates an unfair learning environment or an assessment environment. And so some students are getting grades by violating the rules, while other students are getting usually lower grades for not violating the rules. Okay, so cognitive offloading is not always cheating. but it is cheating when at least one of these three things are true. So why do students offload or cheat? Well, I can't go into all of them because there are a lot. I can summarize it though to say students cheat because they're human beings. And human beings are known to cheat, to lie, to be disrespectful, to be irresponsible, to be untrustworthy at various times, given the right circumstances or the right motivations, right? My colleague Jason Stevens wrote a great article about this in Change magazine a few years ago. And yes, we do have some students who are going to be your serial cheaters, your dark triad personalities, your narcissists, Machiavellists, and psychopaths. And we're not talking about them today. There's not much you can do to stop that percentage of the population from cheating, but they are not the majority of the population. The majority of your students are human beings who are going to cheat given the right circumstances and the right or the wrong, I suppose I should say, motivations. So think about the pandemic. We are under high stress and pressure. There were tons of opportunities because all of their assessments were remote. And they were really focused on just surviving extrinsic goals like safety and health. And they weren't focused on learning necessarily. And cheating, as we all know, ballooned out of control in most circumstances. So there's a lot of things on this list that you can't control as the instructor, but there are a lot of things you can influence. And so when I talk, I'm not gonna, I stay away from when I'm talking to faculty, I stay away from the things that you can't control, right? You can't control what students are coming in with in terms of their skills and abilities. You can't control what stress and pressures they are under. You can't control that the institution makes you teach a class of 600 students. You can't control, you don't have enough teaching assistants, right? So there's lots of things you can't control, and I would do a whole separate webinar to administrators about this problem and what their role is in mitigating cheating and enhancing integrity. Today, I'm going to focus on what instructors can do in your classroom. Okay, so that leads us to this. In my first book, way back in 2008, I encouraged the higher ed community to stop asking, how do we stop students from cheating, and start asking, how do we ensure students are learning, right? There was an obsessive focus with stopping students from cheating. And my advice at that time, and still is that we focus on the learning. And this argument has become more relevant over time. Now, given that it's hard to ensure students are learning, I say more like, how can we best facilitate and assess learning given the realities of the 21st century, right? Where there are people and companies and AI that exist to do assessments for students. And even more specifically, when we're thinking about GenAI, when does it hinder versus amplify learning? And when does it interfere versus assist with assessment? Those are two key questions that I think we really need to ask ourselves. We can't just assume that the tool is bad and we have to prevent its use. We have to really, sit back and think, okay, what is it about my course, my learning objectives, and when can it be helpful and when can it be harmful, and how do I mitigate those harms and amplify the good that it can do? Okay, so let's start with the good, the opportunities. What are you empowered to do? And so the very first thing, if you haven't done it yet, and you may have done it by now, but I've met a lot that haven't, is talk with your students. And I do mean with your students, not at your students. So there's a difference between having a conversation with your students or just communicating with them what your policy is. And I think there's already a link in the chat, but I did create this website for faculty. It's not specific to UC San Diego, so you're welcome to use it. It walks you through the fundamentals. Like, if you don't understand how GenAI works yet, there's a module for that. If you want to see how students and faculty are using it and thinking about it, there's a module for that. But for today, what I'm talking about is how do you discuss it with your students? And then we're going to go into how can you craft your policy. And these, again, are the fundamentals. Then we're going to move on to things you might do for next year because they're going to take longer and take more time on your part. Okay, so talking with your students. Why do you need to talk with them? Well, they're using it, right? So these are stats from high school students a year ago, which means they're in our colleges and universities now. And about half of them have used the tools, and they've used them to complete assignments and exams. So they are using them to do their work for them, right? They use them, a third of them use them at least once a week, and it's because they believe that their use of it will improve their school performance. Now, note it's about improving their performance, which means improving their grades. It's not because they think that it'll help them for learning, to learn the material, to master the material. It's purely focused on how do I get a better grade? And I've talked with a couple hundred students now who've been accused of misusing GenAI on their assignments. And when you talk to them, as you talk to them with any kind of cheating case, their focus is on their grades. I need it. I need to get an A in this course. I need my paper to sound better than what I could do on my own. So they're purely extrinsically focused on the grade, which isn't surprising because the system encourages them to be focused on the grade. But at the same time, they're already using it, and they're using it to complete assignments. They're also really super worried about it. They actually, almost half of them believe their critical thinking will suffer as a result of their use of AI. They're worried about that, not just faculty. They're also worried, and this gets to like leveling the playing field, that if they don't use AI, they're the ones that are going to suffer in terms of grades in competition with other students. And there's a competition with other students. There are still faculty who use grading on a curve. That's a competition. It could be, depending on how it's set up. And of course, there's a real competition. After college, they might be trying to get into university. After university, they might be trying to get into grad or professional school. Grades do have currency, right? And so if their worry with all types of cheating is if other students cheat and get high grades, they'll get into these programs that I won't get into. They admit it's easier to cheat because of these tools. Much, much, much easier. And also, they're really worried because they're wondering, are they even going to have jobs when they graduate? Obviously, computer science students are particularly worried about this. Are all the programming jobs going to be gone? But other students are worried about it too. Like students thinking about accounting, or students thinking about writing or editing or anything like that, right? So there's just a lot of concern there. And I think this number, that again was not quite a year ago, or just over a year ago. So that concern might be even raised since then. So we need to talk to them because they're using it. We need to talk with them because they're using it and they're worried about it at the same time. And so I have 3 suggestions for you to listen to your students. 1, survey them before the term begins. And all of these QR codes, and I'll send this Yerrick out to you so you can send it out to people, the slides, but all these QR codes lead to tools that you can use. They're also linked in that website that I showed you earlier. But survey them before the term begins. Are you using the tools? What tools are you using? How often do you use them? How do you think they could be used ethically in this class? Or on a writing assignment, or on a something. So just asking them these questions and gathering that information. And then, of course, you're going to share back with them what you learned from them. This was advice that I gave to faculty before GenAI, and it's very powerful. So co-creating a class value statement. So students also want an honest, fair, respectful, responsible, and trustworthy learning environment. They really do. Again, your dark triad personality folks maybe don't want that, but every other student does. And what's powerful about this is when you take these fundamental values of academic integrity that we talk about from the International Center for Academic Integrity, and you together co-create a list of how can the students uphold these values and how can the instructional team uphold these values, the students will hear from each other. Well, you shouldn't use GenAI to write your papers for you. You should read the actual text and not just the summaries of the text. You should come to class prepared. When they hear the same stuff from each other that they normally just hear from the professor in a kind of a lecture, it has more meaning. It has more value because one of the big influencers of students cheating is their perception that other students are cheating. So if they hear from their peers that honesty, respect, responsibility, and so on are very important to them, that's more it could be a bigger shaper of their behavior than if you just said those values are important. And I love this because it also says the instructional team has responsibilities to uphold these values too. So it's not just about the students behaving with integrity, but it's about the whole class behaving in ways that uphold integrity. And this one goes in a bit more depth and would take a bit more time. But given your syllabus and given the assessments that you have, you could lay those out. And this is like a sheet students could use, where they're looking at the assessment ahead of time and they're saying, oh, could I use ChatGPT ethically on this assessment? Yes or no, and how could I use it? Kind of dual benefits for this. One, you're getting them to look at the syllabus and look ahead to the next 10, 12, 14 weeks, however long your term is of assessments. And they're like, oh, wow, we've got this many assessments, because we're always complaining, right? The students don't look ahead or plan ahead or read our syllabi. So that's got that one purpose. And then the second purpose is really getting them to think about it for a particular assessment. And you'd be surprised. You'll get some students in your class that will say, like, we should never use it. It's unethical because the product itself is unethical. And then you'll get other students that say, I think we can use it for everything. And they're pretty open about it. So talking with students helps because it mitigates these temptations to offload, right? They will start to recognize actions as ethical when they might not have before. They'll perceive maybe their peers won't be cheating because they've had this conversation with them. They think there'll be cost to cheating because you're spending some time and effort on talking with them about this. So mitigating these temptations is a great reason to talk with students about it. And again, you don't have to do all three of these things. These are just 3 examples of what you could do. Then you have to craft your policy. So again, I've met with over 200 students now about their GenAI misuse. And one of the things they say is, I just want professors to be clear. I just want them to tell me, am I allowed to use it? And if I am, how? Again, the majority of them are not trying to shortcut the learning objectives, at least not consciously. That usually comes under stress and pressure at 11 p.m. at night when the assignment is due at 11:59 p.m. at night. But ahead of time, they want to know what's clear. So we have to communicate about it. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one. I think it was AI in education. And they were talking about, look, we don't have a website somewhere that tells people what the speed limit is on all the roads in your town. There are actually signposts on the road to remind you what the speed limit is. And we have to do the same thing for integrity. We can't just assume. I've seen too many syllabi where it just says, don't violate academic integrity, see the policy, and they just link to the policy, right? Or they don't say anything. I've seen a lot of syllabi where they're not saying anything about artificial intelligence. And so we need to communicate with students, and we need to communicate not just at the beginning of the quarter, but at the appropriate times when the assessments are being introduced, when they're due, and just reminding students of their commitment to integrity. So there's some options, right? You've seen all of this. There's options of what your policy might use. This is the way I went about it in that guide that I showed you that's online for you. You can try and ban it. You can try and do a conditional use policy or a full use policy. And only you as an instructor for a course can decide that, because again, it's connected back to your learning outcomes, and it's connected back to whether you can do secure assessments or not, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So how do you figure out which policy you want to go with? Well, one, I think surveying your students would be a good way to do that. You might learn something from them. You're like, oh, actually, you know what? I am okay with that use. So I'm going to do a conditional use policy, and that's one of the uses I'm going to allow them to do. You could also map your policy out. So I took that AI assessment scale by Perkins et al. That many of you have probably seen, and I put it in a little tool where you can, again, just look at each assessment that you have planned for the class and think, would this type of work using AI be okay on this assessment? No, not at all. Yes, in this way. So you could really thoughtfully think through each of your assessments and whether AI would work on those. Now, I do want to say, if you've got conditional use, of course, that's not going to stop students from going over the line and using it beyond the ways you've articulated. However, again, the majority of students aren't intending to do that. That's not how they're starting out. And so if you are allowing conditional use, I'm not saying that'll stop them from cheating, but it will help some students who are not intentionally going out and circumventing the learning outcomes. Also, caveat, if you want to ban it, they're going to still use it if you do not secure that assessment. Again, because half of them or more think that AI is going to help them get better grades. So if you're going to ban it, please, please, please secure the assessment. So I tell this story about a student who was reported for misusing GenAI on a final exam in one term. And it was at the start of the next term that I was meeting with her, and she admitted it. And she said it's really hard because it's a remote exam, it's on Canvas, and it's easy. It's so easy to just pick up my phone or open another browser and use ChatGPT. And so then she said to me, all of my major classes in this term are in-person classes, but they're all doing remote exams. And can I please test in your testing center? Because I don't think I can resist the temptation and opportunities. And when I first started my job 18 years ago, I said, we have to graduate people who didn't cheat, not because we, made it so it wasn't possible, but because they chose not to. That was my philosophy. And it's still my philosophy that we develop in students the ability to resist ethical temptations, right? Because we need that in society. We're not proctored all the time in society. Yet, at the same time, I'm like, what are we doing to these 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds in the society we have now with all the temptations and opportunities that a lot of us did not have when we were undergrads? And we're saying, here, go do this remote exam, but don't use ChatGPT to answer the questions. It's a lot. It's a lot to ask of teenagers, and I'm not sure it's the right thing that we should be doing anymore. I think perhaps we can scaffold moral self-regulation into students, but I'm not sure we should just. It's kind of like how we throw students into groups, and we tell society that we teach students how to work in groups because we threw them into groups, but we actually never taught them how to work in groups or how to collaborate. So I think it's similar to that. We should be teaching students how to morally self-regulate and scaffolding that in for them, and not just throwing them into the lion's pit and expecting them to resist the lion, right? So securing the assessment really starts where academic integrity finishes. You want to create a culture of integrity. You want to show that you value it and the students value it. And then there has to be some secure assessments if our degrees and our diplomas are going to have any integrity at all in this age of artificial intelligence. And I know a lot of faculty, especially on the teaching and learning professionals, will say like, no, that's surveillance. We should just trust our students. And I'm somewhat famous for saying you can trust that your students are human and they're going to cheat when they're tempted and there's opportunities. And so what can you do to mitigate that? So there's the one side of what can you do to mitigate it? And then there's the other side of what can you do to assure that our certifications still have value at the end of the day. Now, Phil Dawson, who I've quoted here, would say the same thing, and I learn a lot from him. He's at Deakin University in Australia. The argument now is that we shouldn't be doing necessarily secure assessments. Every assessment in every class doesn't need to be secure, that we need to move more to like competency-based education where we're doing secure assessments at important benchmarks, and there's mastery learning that lead up to that. That's a whole other webinar, but I do want to say that in our current structure where faculty give a grade in a course that leads to a degree or a diploma, we need to have secure assessments. And if you decide you're not banning it for a particular assessment or all of your assessments, then I encourage you to make its use transparent. So there's a couple of things going on here. One, I do think process is going to become more important than product, right? And that we have to teach students we have to teach them how to communicate about their process, because their employers might want to know how they got from A to Z as well. So making their use transparent, where they have to acknowledge how they used it, what they used, also helps with their metacognition, right? So that they understand like, well, what point did you go to use it and why did you go to use it? So they can begin to assess, am I using it smartly? Am I using it wisely? Am I using it in ways that help my learning or hinder my learning? So we want to encourage that, not from a surveillance approach, although part of it is making sure they're using it in the ways that were intended, but also for learning and metacognition. Enrique, did you have a question?
Yes, I'll let Deborah go first and I'll go second.
Okay, I didn't see Eric's.
Deborah, unmute yourself. Um, Deborah, you raise your hand. Unmute yourself, please. If not, I'll go. Um, uh, we have a lot of things going on in the chat.
Okay.
Dr. Berman, one of the question is, if students are prone to cheating, right? How do we change the curriculum? Because we are so used to teaching by in front of the classroom, right? So how do we change the curriculum?
That's the second half of my talk.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. These are the fundamentals, right, that we have to do without
Yeah.
changing the curriculum, because this is the lower hanging fruit. And so these clear communicating and clear policy and plan reduces or mitigates these temptations to offload. Right? Okay, so yes, that's this year or like this year for next year, right? For next fall's classes. We need to, and honestly, we've needed to do this since the internet was invented, if not before. But we need to shift our classes from performance to mastery oriented. So huge reasons why students cheat is they're extrinsically motivated. The system tells them grades are all that matters. And then they get into classes that are performance oriented, that give them points for attending, that give them points for handing things in, that don't look at process, they look mostly at product. And so that is a perfect storm for students to offload or cheat in their classes. So I think I have 4 ideas for how we can shift. And our book that's coming out in March is very much directed to a lot of this information and gets into more ideas and more details. But idea 1, we really do need to reconsider the learning outcomes at this point. So I was talking with a professor in a biology class, and she still had as a learning outcome that students will develop the ability to concisely write about, biology or whatever. And I said, concisely write, is that still a relevant learning outcome? And she says, of course it is. They have to. And I said, okay, but machines help us do that. So is that still really relevant? Is that your job as a biologist to assess whether students can be concise in their communication in biology? Maybe it is. I'm not saying it's not, but that's an example of maybe where it's not relevant anymore. Are they even clearly stated? I've seen way too many syllabi where there's no learning outcomes whatsoever. So students have no idea about the why of why they're there. So they're going to perform. They're not going to try and master anything if they don't even understand what they're there to master. Or if they're stated, say, on the first page of the syllabus, there's no information on linking them to the assessments and activities later on. So the students still have no idea why they're doing an assessment in a certain way, why they're doing certain activities, because they're not connected back to the learning outcomes. Is it easy for students to fake their achievement, right? So we know that the lower down on Bloom's taxonomy, for example, the easier it is for ChatGPT to do it. And so if we're focused on remembering, understanding, and even applying, it's very easy to offload those to AI. Now, I'm saying this again, you have to consider the context of your class. So if you're teaching a fundamental class, a class that teaches the fundamentals of a discipline, right? Say physics. Students are going to have to remember and understand some things without the help of AI in order to be able to later perhaps even cognitively offload to AI, right? So that's when we have to look at this as a continuum. So maybe in physics one, physics one, the assessments have to be secure. The learning outcomes are the learning outcomes. They have to stay at remember and understand. But in the next class, right, we're moving students up, or the next sequence of classes, we're moving students up to apply and analyze, and then we're moving them up to evaluate and create. So really what the 21st century is calling for us is to make more programmatic decisions about these things rather than just a course by course basis. Also, you might consider that you could add a learning outcome related to ethically or responsibly using GenAI, right? Depending on what you're teaching. If you're teaching writing, that might be a good learning outcome to add. If you're teaching policy making, that might be a good learning outcome to add. It really depends on your course. So reconsidering learning outcomes is a kind of a huge first a step beyond the fundamentals. We hear about authenticate assessments all the time, and it almost becomes trite in the way we talk about it. And this, again, none of these are silver bullets. You cannot authenticate assess your way out of the cheating problem before GenAI or after GenAI, but they can help increase students' intrinsic motivations for learning, which should decrease their motivations to cheat. Well, how do we authenticate assessments? Individualize them. So allowing students to choose how they demonstrate their knowledge and abilities, allowing them to connect these assignments to real life, whether it's their real life or something that's happening in society, making it dependent on class knowledge. So again, ChatGPT can still do that assignment if the student uploads all your lectures with the prompt, perhaps, but it's more work. So anytime we're like raising the barrier on how easy it is to get ChatGPT to do my stuff for me, the less likely students will do it, right? Can you make the assessment GenAI assisted? That would be more authentic in the students' minds because that's connected to real life. They're going to be using GenAI for all sorts of things. So can we actually turn the assignment into one that is assisted by GenAI? Presented to an audience. So my co-author, David Rettinger, he gives this example in the book about a history professor who, I think it was a history professor, who had his class work with the local park and they did some research on some of the plants and some of the fixtures that were in this park, and they created signs to educate the visitors on what was in that park. And so the students were motivated to get it right. They wasn't just going to be a TA or an instructor who was going to look at it to give them a grade. It was actually meaningful and important to other people. But that could even be in a class if a student has to present their knowledge in class or present it to a team. Again, if they can choose, if they can make some choice, that could range from as little as what, again, my co-author David does, where he has students generate questions for the tests that he then uses, or it could go as far as, I want to demonstrate my chemistry knowledge, not in a research lab report, but in a poster or in a presentation or in a video blog or in a Wikipedia entry. And of course, they're more authentic the further we get up Bloom's taxonomy. And so again, I created another tool where you can use GenAI to rethink your assessments. I walk you through how to do that. And it's not easy, obviously, to rethink our assessments, but I have found that ChatGPT or whatever other GenAI tool you're using is very good at brainstorming with you and coming up with ideas. You're probably not going to use them wholesale, but at least it gets your juices flowing and you don't feel like you're alone trying to figure this out. Evaluating process where we can is very important. When can we scaffold summative assignments? So I still see a lot of classes, and it's probably not the audience that's here today, but a lot of classes where it's 2 papers and a final paper, right? Why not a final paper and all of the papers that lead up to that final paper are scaffolded towards that one goal? Can we observe the student doing the skill or applying the knowledge? So I love team-based learning. And when I teach, I use team-based learning. It's a fantastic flipped classroom model. Students are active and engaged. They have to be accountable to their teammates for doing the work. They can't show up phoning it in, at least not every week. They're applying their knowledge. It leads to authentic assessments and activities. We really need in the 21st century to be the place where students come for human-to-human interaction. We cannot continue with this model where students come to us to sit in a lecture hall to listen to a lecture for 1, 2, or 3 hours and then go and do their learning outside of class. We are going to lose them. And we'll lose them either in our enrollment or we'll lose them in terms of they'll cheat their way through their degree. So even in classrooms, we're stuck. We're stuck with our surroundings, right? We're stuck in a lecture hall that's got unmovable seats. Even in those situations, we can flip the classroom a bit or make it more active and engaged, where students are doing the skill or applying the knowledge in front of other people. We could talk more to our students about their process. And yes, even at in large classes, we had a group of engineering faculty here who established oral assessments during the pandemic to make sure that students were understanding the material and or that they could talk about their process. And one of the benefits of that when they surveyed the students is all the students strongly felt that this reduced the opportunities for cheating. And again, one of the biggest reasons students cheat is because they think other people are doing it. And so that was very helpful for reducing cheating in their class. And finally, using tools for transparency into the writing process. Here we get back to that's surveilling. People get very upset about that. I remind people that the definition of surveillance is close observation, comma, usually under criminal activity. But if we just leave that, we just leave the comma phrase behind, it's close observation. What is wrong with getting insight into the transparency of the students, getting insight into the students' writing process if we're not using it just to punish them, if we're using it to enhance their learning, to facilitate their learning, to redirect them if they're going down the wrong path? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Think of it more of the apprenticeship model of education that we used to have before we industrialized higher education. You could do that with Google Docs. You could do that with all sorts of My Essay. There's all sorts of tools out there that you could use for that. And finally, idea 4 for fostering a mastery-oriented environment, reconsider grading structures. Reconsidering mastery means, so if you haven't done this yet, you run your assignment through a GenAI tool and you grade it. And if you say, well, it passes, but it's only a pass, it's only a C, that's not great. Well, C's get degrees. We can't have that approach to things. And so if the machine can basically accomplish a passing grade on that assignment, the assignment either needs to change, and that could mean working with GenAI, or it could just mean you need to change that assignment, or you need to change the grading rubric in the sense of what ChatGPT can produce no longer as a passing effort. What I find difficult about GenAI is it is hard to tell the difference between what has been AI generated and what is just a bad paper. They've got the same characteristics often: superficial approach, it wasn't a deep reading, they didn't connect it to the class discussions, right? So it is really a C-level student. And so that might change your grading rubrics. And also you could work with ChatGPT to change your rubric. And maybe we don't grade everything. Maybe there's more formative assessments, more feedback for learning, and less about the performance when it comes to the grade. So why does fostering a mastery-oriented environment work? To reduce cheating, because it mitigates these temptations. So summary, start playing with the tools if you haven't already. Even if you don't want to use them for your academic work yet, make a recipe, develop weekend plans, hopefully test your assessments. Then whatever term you have coming up next is probably either spring or winter, depending on what school you go to and what you call it. Talk with your students about it. Talk about it with talk to them about their use, and make sure you have a clear policy for students to guide them. And then this year in plans for next September, next August or September, make your class more about learning than doing, and that should help increase integrity and reduce cheating. And we'll open it up to more questions, Enrique. And again, I'll send these slides out. They've got an explanation for all the images that I used as well that came from ChatGPT.
Thank you. That's a wonderful presentation. We have can't even pronounce your name, but I'm sorry. Kershit?
Yes, hi, thank you. So thank you for the presentation. I kind of saw your slides halfway through. I couldn't understand why I couldn't see your slides for almost half the presentation. And then I was like, why is nobody else protesting?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it was something to do with Zoom, not you. So
Okay.
anyway, my question to you is, you mentioned that, we're maybe moving more towards process assessment rather than product, and something like moving more towards PBL or project-based learning versus exams and so on. So I teach anatomy, physiology among all the subjects that I teach. Now that is a very heavy subject in terms of spelling and memorization,
Yes.
anatomy particularly. Students have recently not all students. I mean, sometimes they argue, why should I need to know this spelling, etc.? Because now doctors' offices are using, what do you call it? Like iPads with a drop-down menu. So they just like click which bone, and then there's a menu, and then they just find the bone. They don't really need to spell it out. They're not writing it in. Anyway, but this is my personal opinion, is that there are two bones, for example, tibia and fibula in the lower leg. And it's very easy, even on an exam, that students will write tibula, which is the first half of tibia, and fibula, they'll merge the words. So spelling is important when it comes to clinicals and things like that. And if we are missing that foundational skill in students, and we are saying, okay, just make a project on a skeletal system case study or something like that, I personally, at least as of now, I don't think the technology is quite there where I would feel comfortable being treated by somebody who doesn't even know which bone it is, and along the way, this healthcare system, somebody misspelled something, clicked on something incorrectly, and x-rayed the wrong bone, and I'm in surgery. So what is your thought on that? Because it's okay in some disciplines, but I don't think it translates so seamlessly into all disciplines, especially things where you're dealing with somebody's life and you want a student to have that strong foundational skill.
Yeah.
And things like that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I really appreciate it, because I think it applies to disciplines beyond yours. There are fundamental concepts that we still need to teach students so that they can cognitively offload later, right? So we still teach students, little kids, arithmetic, even though there's calculators. We still teach kids spelling and grammar, even though there's machines to do that, because there's something about the people in those disciplines have decided through research and what have you, that knowledge is necessary in order to effectively use the tools that will allow you to cognitively offload. Like you said, if I don't know how to spell it, how am I going to notice these two bones that have only 3 letters difference? So now we're operating on the wrong, we've opened the person up on for the wrong body part. And so those are the courses where they're going to have just have secure assessments. You're not going to convince students not to cheat on those out of class assessments. They're going to cheat. So you have to have, for the foundational courses, you have to have secure assessments. So students get the basic level of knowledge that they need, the remembering and understanding. And then they'll see as they progress through the program, okay, now I'm allowed to use that tool where I can just click the right bone or the right body part. And then they will, as they progress through that program, they will then spread the word down to the younger ones. No, seriously, this is why we have to do it, because if we don't, we're going to mess up later. So it goes back to programmatic or competency-based approaches rather than these individual course by course approaches. So hopefully that comes across for everybody, no matter whether you teach anatomy or chemistry or what have you. And there's fundamental concepts in every discipline that people probably still have to remember and understand in order to use those tools later.
What a wonderful response. Vernon, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Great talk. I really appreciate the scaffolding from the fundamentals to some practical ways to approach this. So thank you again. You mentioned something towards the very end and you moved kind of quickly through it. I'm not criticizing, but I would like you to talk a little bit more specifically about, you said you had recommend running your assignment through AI and then revisiting, I guess, both the assignment and the rubric. And I'm really interested in maybe an example of how a rubric transformed from initially and then after it changed after running it through, and what sort of guidance you had for what would want you to make those changes in the rubric.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Vernon. Thanks. Yeah, I always end up rushing at the end, so, so I leave time for questions. So there's a couple of ways to go about it, right? So you could run just the prompt and have ChatGPT answer it. And then actually I would probably give it to my TA or somebody else to grade according to my rubric, rather, who doesn't know that it's AI generated, maybe give them a few, right? That would be ideal. So, and if they say, oh yeah, I would give this a C or a B, then you know either the assignment prompt needs to change or the rubric needs to change. And it could be not the whole rubric. Again, I am finding still to this day that faculty and TAs are overemphasizing things like spelling and grammar. I just met with a student the other day, and the only feedback he got on his assignment were missing a comma, missing a comma, missing a comma. So of course he then went to Grammarly to help him fix his next paper for him, right? And that did not just include the commas, but included all the rewriting of the sentences, which made his paper sound like a robot wrote it. So that focus, so maybe it's not the whole rubric, right? Maybe it's just the criteria. I'm going to drop the spelling and grammar thing because like we used to grade for reference formatting, right? We don't do that anymore because the machines do it for us. So maybe I get rid of some of the criteria, but also maybe I change what mastery means along the row. So what one point used to be no grammar errors. You know, I get rid of that whole row, but maybe it's just what some of the mastery benchmarks are. And so if you do that and you're like, okay, so I like the prompt for whatever reason, it's what students need to know how to do, then I either have to decide I'm going to make it secure and somehow, right? Or I'm going to augment it. Either I'm going to say, hey, you can use GenAI in these ways for it, or I'm going to change my rubric. And again, one of the things I love about these GenAI tools, because a lot of faculty are very protective or shy about sharing their assignments and their rubrics and their syllabi with other faculty, with colleagues to get critiques on them. And so GenAI is a great, non-judgmental tool. And so I would then give the assignment and the rubric back to GenAI, and I would say, you're an expert. I've got the chain of thought prompting, and get it to give you ideas for how the rubric could look different. So I can't really get more specific than that, Vernon, because it really just depends, right, on the class and the discipline and the learning objectives. But those are the ways that you can play with it in your context. Does that somewhat answer your question?
A little bit. It kind of sounded like you were advocating for a more sophisticated level of understanding, learning,
Yeah.
in the Bloom's taxonomy.
Basically, if it's an out-of-class assessment that's not secure, yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Let GenAI tools do that other pieces. If they don't need those pieces, as the earlier discussion just revealed that sometimes they might, but then it's got to be secure.
Any other questions? We have 3 minutes.
Sorry, I hate the webinars in the sense of that I can't keep up on the chat while I'm talking at the same time, because it looks like there was a lot of good stuff in here.
Well, we thank you so much for coming and being with us. Even though you might have been a little bit under the weather, you sounded perfect.
Oh, thank you.
We are, oh, yes,
I
somebody,
did put in a question and it's very basic. I'm sorry. How
okay.
do I get an AI tool to use to check
To check what?
for AI generated?
Oh, you want me to talk about AI detection? Okay.
Yeah,
2
or just
minutes.
links.
I will take very short time to say, don't unless it's Turnitin's detection tool. I am not paid by Turnitin, but all the research studies show that their detection tool is the most accurate, and they err on false negatives rather than false positives, which means they err on saying a human wrote it rather than an AI wrote it. So that's the first thing. Plus, if your institution's already using Turnitin, students are already submitting their papers there. You should not be going out on the web and just randomly submitting your students' papers to tools on the web. They've got varying capabilities and accuracy, and plus you don't have the right to do that. You don't have the right to take your student's assignment and put it out there on the web. But when you're doing it through your system, through a tool that's already vetted by your institution, that's fine. And not using the detector's output, if you are using something like Turnitin that your university is already using, not using it as, well, the student cheated. It is one piece of data. It is not the only piece of data. You really should be able to look at the paper yourself and see like, oh yeah, because they didn't do this, this, and this. And I've got some information on my website about how to detect AI use. And you need to have a conversation with the student about their process to see what happened. I would rather see, and I know this is harder, I'd rather see institutions give faculty time, training, and support to redesign their courses and assessments. And then I would rather faculty do that and rather than try and catch cheating. Because remember, early on in my presentation, the slide was, we need to stop asking how do we stop students from cheating and ask more, how can we best facilitate and assess learning in the 21st century? So that's I'm not a don't use detector girl. I think tools are helpful, but we need to use them smartly and judiciously and with the students learning first and foremost in mind, and not as its only piece of data.
Thank you so much, Tricia.